Welcome to The Drummer's Pathway, the podcast about music, life, and the creative process. Hello, I'm Michael Scott, and welcome to the Drummer's Pathway podcast, where we explore the personal and professional journeys of drummers, educators, and artists who've committed their lives to creativity and the arts. This episode features my conversation with Justin Faulkner. Based in Philadelphia, Justin is a drummer, composer, and educator whose passion for music began early on. Starting formal training at age 7, he studied classical music, jazz, and percussion at the Settlement Music School and the Clef Club of Jazz and Performing Arts, while also receiving instruction from the Principal Timpanist of the Philadelphia Orchestra. As a child prodigy, he stepped into the professional jazz scene at just 13 years old, and by 2009 had joined the Branford Marsalis Quartet, which is a seat he has held ever since. Beyond performing, he is deeply committed to education and community, serving as an instructor at Temple University's Boyer College of Music and Dance, and mentoring the next generation of musicians with the same encouragement he received. In our conversation, we talk about how he got his start with formal music education, the importance of listening to the people who have followed this path before you, and how faith and spirituality remains an essential focus in his life. As this interview ran close to 2 hours, I have divided it into 2 episodes, so let's sit back and get started with part 1 of my interview with Justin Faulkner. The humble nature of many drummers in this industry is one of the things that makes the drum community one of the best communities in the world.
I agree, without a doubt, man. I mean, it's just like we are truly a massive family. Like, I literally just played the jazz festival last night, and I was hanging out with the drummer CV DeShield from Washington, D.C., who's like one of my favorite cats. And then I also saw Quincy Phillips. They had the Roy Hargrove Big Band playing, and then hung out with Marcus Gilmore. And he was playing with Nicholas Payton and Lenny Williams, who's a drummer in D.C. as well, killing player. Yeah, it was beautiful. And we all just, egged each other on at the shows. I mean, it was really cool. Saw Jason Marsalis too.
Oh, Jason's an incredible player. Very underrated, but he's just got such a beautiful touch and approach to his musicianship. I had the pleasure of actually seeing him with the Marsalis family band in Toronto a number of years ago, which I thought was a really fascinating show to watch, because you had Ellis Marsalis, Winton, Branford, Delfeo, Jason, the whole band there, and and they're all icons in their own right. But it was interesting to see them on stage with their dad. So they'd be joking around with certain things, and then you just see Ellis kind of give them that look like, okay, guys, let's make sure we take this seriously. And I've seen most of them on their own. And so it was interesting to see them in that context. And you just look at the lineage of that family, and it's just incredible what they've all accomplished.
Yeah, and I mean, and their mother was, Miss Dolores was a remarkable human being. I mean, it's funny, like, if I'm not mistaken, I believe like the musical lineage from a ancestral standpoint actually comes, a large majority of it comes from her side. Like, I believe Branford's related to the bassist Wellman Broad that played with Duke Ellington, and he's related to the bassist from the Meters, George Porter. It's just that they're an amazing family, and I'm really grateful that I'm, an adopted member in a sense. Like I get a chance to see these guys and chat with them pretty often. So, and I've built a rapport with them over the years. So it's been really cool.
I first had the incredible honor of seeing you play with the Branford Marsalis Quintet right around the time when you first joined. I think it was the first show you had played in Toronto, and I think you were probably around 18 to 19 at the time, and you were headlining one of the Toronto Jazz Festival shows. Previously, I had seen Branford play with Jeff Tane Watts, which was an exceptional experience, and so I was really interested to kind of, experience the new lineup and get your take on this at such a young age, and I was blown away
Hmm.
by your musical maturity, your
Thank you.
confidence, but your humble nature to step into that role and be willing to learn and absorb the experience of these icons on that stage. And I think your ability and your respect to be able to learn from people who have been doing this significantly longer than you have is one of the
Mhm.
things that has made you such an incredible musician. Because I think sometimes at the younger age, it's all about you and what you can do.
Sure.
And I think that's a
Sure.
lesson that you learned a long time ago, that it's really about the collective musical experience and
Hmm.
what you have to offer in that conversation. And and that
Sure.
can be humbling.
Sure. I mean, I think, growing up in Philadelphia is one of the greatest gifts that I've ever received. I mean, I I fell in love with jazz when I was about 10, I believe it was. And, it was because my parents played amazing music in the house, and me and my dad, we would just kind of hang out in the master bedroom where my parents slept, and he had like a massive sound system in there. And so we just listened to records,
Hmm.
and so, and I hated jazz at first, funny enough. I couldn't stand it. I was like, man, can you please turn on? Like, I think I was kind of like a fusion
Yeah.
gospel R&B guy, and yeah, and he would play ballads. I'm like, man, can you turn off the slow songs, brother? Like, I don't need this in my life. And then, I heard Kind of Blue, and we started playing it I believe we were playing it in school. And, I was playing in I played in a band basically since first grade,
Hmm.
and started studying music in first grade. So, and then having parents where, my mom was a child prodigy pianist, my dad sang in a doo-wop group, and then they both went on to pursue other careers. But, my parents had impeccable music taste. So I got an early dose of what transcription was, but more so oral transcription
Hmm.
than written. And, I didn't know I was internalizing, iconic pieces of music. Like my mom had me listening to Brahms because she was a classical pianist, and my dad had me listening to Jethro Tull and like Led Zeppelin and Cold Blood, and my mom also had me listening to the OJs and the Spinners and the Fifth Dimension. So, my love for music started very early. Then I think when I started really pursuing playing in older bands, and in more organized ensembles, my teachers would always kind of instill. They always tried to instill the idea that the songs are the most important piece of the puzzle. And I think having that being the overarching narrative and sort of North Star
Hmm.
of my development allowed me to realize that, one, I signed up to be a musician first, then a drummer. And so what that does is it eliminates the need for talent attacks, as our band calls it. It's like the idea where, everything is going great and you feel this euphoria, and then all of a sudden you just start having your way with the moment. And it's like, well, one, the moment doesn't belong to you, it belongs to us.
Hmm.
So and so essentially, I started playing with so many older musicians in Philadelphia. Jamaluddin Takumu is the person that found me first. I was playing in my living room, and he was delivering a vintage garment to a client across the street from me. And he essentially knocked on my door and asked my parents could he come in to see the drummer. And when he saw that I was a 13-year-old kid, he was just like, "Wait, that was you? There's no way." And so he asked me to demonstrate, like, play some swing, play some
Yeah.
funk, play some Latin stuff. And so I did. And then I started playing a gig with him every week for like 2 or 3 years. And then we did some other projects later on in life with Ornette Coleman and Tony Kofi and Wolfgang Pushnig. And so, he gave me my start of consistently gigging. And, I've always, just because of how my family was structured, I've always had a certain reverence and respect for leadership, but also for my elders. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I was very close with my grandparents, and my grandparents, you know, they were both born in the 20s. So, you know, they grew up during the era of the music that I'm studying. So I used to
Yeah.
ask them a lot of questions. You know, my grandmother had met Louis Armstrong several times. And, you know, there was a place I think it was in New Jersey, right outside of Philly, called the Latin Casino. And so they would go see all of these, you know, incredible artists perform. You know, my grandfather saw John Coltrane play at clubs in Philly. And so, you know, and then I had a neighbor actually, this guy named Bob Cunningham. um, he he had all of these old Basie tapes, you know, VHS videos of the band playing, and you know, of like some of the variety shows that existed in the 50s and such. So I'd go over his house, we'd order a couple cheesesteaks and some grape sodas, and we'd just sit there and he would call it our jam session. And I did that until he passed away. He passed away at about 92 or 93, I believe. And then, you know, I had another gentleman, this incredible drummer named Eric Roberts. He heard me, he saw me kind of hovering around the drum set during a jazz series that we had in my neighborhood. I will preface everything that I'm going to say with, there's no way that I could have designed the life that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and me being a very spiritual and also devout Christian. I genuinely believe that my life has been divinely ordered and organized, because I mean, who would have thought that I would have a ongoing jazz series that was started by a vocalist named Denise King, who I ended up playing with quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I call her Auntie Denise. You know, she started a jazz series around the corner from my house, literally like less than 100 feet. So me and my parents would get in the car, we'd go around the corner. And, you know, I was going for the chicken kebabs at first. It wasn't for the music. I have to be. They had the greatest barbecue chicken chicken kebabs that I had ever had in my life. But yeah, so like I go around there and I'd see all of the like legendary local players, you know, from Bootsy Barnes to Lucky Thompson playing drums, and Bootsy Barnes playing saxophone. Sam Reed, who was the musical director for essentially our Apollo here, called the Uptown Theater. You know, he was the musical director for that. He also played on Philly International Records. I would see Charles Fambro, who I ended up, you know, becoming very close with and playing in his last band that he had before he passed. And I mean, I met everybody that was a part of the Philly scene and also global scene, to be fair. So, you know, like this guy, Eric Roberts, he was around there one night when I asked the drummer, could I play? And he was like, man, look, I live around the corner. And apparently he and my dad actually grew up around the same neighborhood and such. So they knew each other. And so I'd go over his house and he'd give me videotapes of like Dennis Chambers and Omar Hakim. And like, I call them all like the superhero drummers,
Yeah.
you know? So I'd watch all of these videos and I just try to play like them, you know, for the longest time. And I mean, I think we all are still kind of chasing that,
For sure.
that desire. But, you know, I've had significant mentorship in my life the entire time. So, you know, there was never a moment where I was kind of, you know, walking on a tightrope trying to figure out how I'm going to get across.
Yeah.
It was that, you know, they taught me how to balance myself. You know, they taught me how to, you know, take each step forward, and then watched me sometimes fall down on the net because I had to in order to develop and to have a sense of what worked and what wouldn't work for me. But you know, yeah, from like 13 to 18, and I had significant mentorship in my life of several people that they just instilled in me. And I think my parents were also very integral in this, where, you know, it's about the collective and it's about the overall goal that we have. It's about the work, you know. And so having the experiences of playing with Jamaluddin, and then I started playing with Orrin Evans and JD Walter quite early. I think I was like 14 years old. They had a group that they led at a private music school called Settlement here in Philly. You know, I started playing with them. They took me on my first tour. You know, took me to Ukraine. We went to Kharkov, and we also played in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Then shortly after, I joined the Mingus Band. I was 15 years old when I did that, and you know, Boris Kozlov came to Philly at a jam session that I used to play every Wednesday with Orrin. And he went to my parents. He said, I kind of want Justin to come to New York and play with the Mingus Band. And so I think I still might be the youngest member ever to join the band. And again, I think while I respected authority, and I say authority from not necessarily a place of power, but a place of stewardship,
Yep.
it's like they had a responsibility that they willingly kind of took on to help shepherd and usher me through the processes that I needed to go through in order to develop as an artist and as a human being. So, you know, I've had so many people that have poured into me over time. And so while many people have always said that I had maturity, that could very well be a thing. The other part is that I valued the elders that I had in my life, and I had a very high regard for them. So one, I didn't want to let them down. Two, I love music. I
Yeah.
love every single genre there is, and if I'm unaware of it, I want to learn more and I want to experience the culture that has created the sound that we're experiencing. And so, yeah, I think, while there may have been maturity, and I mean, I'm still on the younger side. I'm about to turn 35. I think it's the idea that all of these people that have existed before us have created this magnificent sound that we're all kind of internalizing and reinterpreting. And it's a great responsibility. It affects people's mood. It is capable of giving solace and soothing in moments of despair and darkness. And the fact that I'm, you know, blessed enough to have the privilege to create sounds of that nature in a way that honors, the John Coltrane's, the Jimmy Heaths, the Benny Golsons, the Baby Dodds, the Big Sick Cadlet, the Zooty Singletons, and then Philly wise, the Mickey Rokers and such. It's a great responsibility, and I don't take it lightly, and I'm grateful that the people who have continually asked me to collaborate with them, and those who also take on the accept the invitation to collaborate with me when I'm working on my own stuff, they trust me with the chair, and the chair is an important place, and so I do my best to try to steward that well.
There's a beautiful quote on your website that states, "The music tells us what to play. It is completely up to us to honor its wishes." And I think that philosophy ties into the maturity aspect. And what I mean about maturity, what I mean is it's respect for the generations that came before us and what it is that they've achieved. Because sometimes people look at maturity and they say, it's what you've accomplished. And I look at maturity as essentially being it's what you've been able to open up and embrace in terms of the collective experiences. And that's from what you can internalize and really learn from. Because a lot of people base everything entirely on accomplishment. And I think that it's really more about how big is your dialogue? How open is your community in terms of having these musical discussions? I'm a huge Branford Marsalis fan, and I've seen you play probably every single show you've done in Toronto with him
Oh
since
man,
you started.
that's awesome. Thank you.
And at Kerner Hall, which is probably one of my favorite concert venues, I always buy the behind the stage seats, so I literally can just have the bird eye view of watching the whole band. And one of the things that I find fascinating about the Branford Marsalis quartet, particularly Branford, is that it's this amazing collective of experiences and musical talent, but yet there's a mutual respect of all of the members on stage. And what I love is that Branford's always at the front until his moment is done, and then he always walks to the back of the stage behind everyone as if he's sort of testing you, and he's watching what it is that you're doing, almost as if you're in an exam. And if there's something that doesn't sort of connect with what he believes is imperative for the music, you're probably going to hear about it afterwards, in a supportive type of fashion. But he's very well aware of what's going on stage, but he stands back where he wants everyone to have that opportunity to sort of participate and learn and grow. Because I think he's really big on challenge when he truly believes that you're up for it. Because I think the best mentors are not the ones that always make it easy for you, but I think the best mentors are the ones that are not afraid to humble you, challenge you, because they see capabilities in a way that you sometimes don't see in yourself. And that's kind of the vibe that I get when I watch the Branford Marsalis Quartet.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, early on when I joined the band, I was, and let me backtrack actually. Thank you for the compliment that you gave regarding that first show, because I believe we played outside at
Yeah.
Toronto Jazz Festival. Yeah. Yeah. And Dave Holland played right before us, I believe. And that was the day that I met Nate Smith, actually, funny enough, and Chris Potter, Robin Eubanks, and Steve Nelson. So I think early on, Branford was very adamant about me enhancing my vocabulary, sonically and historically, right? So something that I actually recently started talking to my students about, when you're a child, when you're a baby and you're learning to speak at first, you are attempting to articulate the shaping of words and language, but you don't yet have the vocabulary to formulate sentences. And so essentially it's gibberish. And, in an interesting way, sometimes I genuinely believe that, the child believes that they're saying something, and the adults are trying to decipher what it is. And there are times where it's kind of like, oh, wow, that actually had the flow of, a sentence that someone could comprehend. But over time, as you internalize more of the language and more of the sound that is around you, I mean, shoot, as a child, you're encountering hundreds of thousands of people over the course of your life and over the course of your childhood. So, you're internalizing all different sounds, which is why like you end up hearing kids curse like at a super young age, but the point is, as you're formulating and creating and developing your understanding of the language, over time you start to understand how you want to express yourself. When I joined Branford's band, essentially I was about at I'll say like I was musically speaking in comparison to them. I maybe had like the vocabulary of a teenager, which essentially I was, right? Whereas like I could formulate sentences. It was clear that I liked jazz and that I could play it, but I just didn't have a ton of lineage in my playing, in the way that they did, So over time, well, one, like my first gig in Seattle, Branford and all of the guys basically told me to come to their rooms with a hard drive so that they could give me music to learn and listen to. And I mean, I still utilize that stuff today, and I've passed it down to my students and those that I mentor now. But, spending time with that information, and there was even like a midpoint where, my bassist, our bassist Eric Rivas, asked me, was I serious about playing music? Because he said, man, it is imperative for you to go into the deep as it pertains to you playing this music. And one of the greatest quotes that he ever told me was that, he said, man, you have to take each note like your life depends on it, because it does. And in order to play or take a note with a level of conviction and intentionality behind it, kind of have to have context. And, learning and still studying. I mean, this is one of the most astute groups of musicians that I've ever played with. I mean, just today, Branford sent us, a Professor Longhair record. He's like, yo, this is what I'm checking out. When I talked to Eric Rivas, he, one of the first questions that he asked me is like, hey, man, what are you reading? And then Joey and we have a conversation about, haberdashery and functionality of luggage and things. Like we all have our thing that we go into, and Joey's taught me a great deal about music and also like about cars, like things that that aren't really in my wheelhouse. So, we do our best to consistently study things that we find value in. And I think, developing over time Branford was definitely very vocal about what he didn't want. But to be fair, Branford has never really been the kind of band leader where he tells you what to play.
Yes.
His whole philosophy is like, man, you can play whatever you want, just don't play that thing that you just did that I don't like.
Yeah.
And it's more so, it's less so that he doesn't like it. It's more so that his ears are so incredible that he's like, this doesn't help the song. Like, what are you going to add to the conversation that helps propel the narrative? But that helps to propel, or that helps to color like that adds a certain color to the sonic palette that we're developing for this particular piece of music. So yeah, early on he was very vocal about like, yeah man, you're dragging, you're rushing, and he would point those things out. But funny enough, now, like, the last concert that we did at Kerner Hall, we were just laughing the whole time because it's now helpful that my vocabulary has improved quite a bit, hopefully. And since I was 18, and so, I'm able to converse with them in a different way than I did when I was 18. Additionally, funny enough, that night was also very special because the artistic director, Mervan Mekta, is actually like a very close family friend of ours, of my family. I've known Mervan since I was a kid because he was I believe head of programming at the Kimmel Center here in Philadelphia. So, that evening, while that's also one of our favorite places to play, I got a chance to it's wonderful when the people who have poured into you get an opportunity to see that flower grow. And Mervan literally has known me since the beginning of my career. Now we're our playing is conversational, and I have more to contribute, as well as better information to contribute to the conversation. So I think now it's more so Branford sits in the back so that, while he's not included in that part of the dialogue, people aren't staring at him.
Yes.
Because ultimately it's his band, but we are truly a band. It's like Branford offers us a level of ownership of the music and of the sonic space that we're creating. And so, he's sitting in the back half the time. He's just grooving and enjoying it, changing reeds, making jokes. Like, he and I have all these musical inside jokes that I'll play. And, like there's like these iconic drum solos, like, the opening to Old Cowhand on the Sonny Rollins record, Way Out West. Or like there's a Baby Dodds drum solo called Spooky Drums #1. And, the Art Blakey solo on Booze Delight, like all of these things that, I'll kind of invert or do, wacky things with it. And Branford's kind of like, oh, really? This is what you chose to do today, right? So I think, yeah, we just do our best to make the connection that or not even make the connection. I think we just do our best to be as organic and honest as possible when we're playing. Like how we are on stage is how we are in airport lounges, is how we are at dinner. It's how we are, supporting each other when, we have our own solo endeavors, when we're navigating, things of family and so forth. So what you see is the truth. Fortunately, you get to experience that hour and a half of what we, fortunately enough, have been able to live with the iteration of the band for the last 17 years.
I think one of the reasons why I also love sitting where I do at Kerner Hall is that I'm actually close enough to hear the onstage conversations.
Oh, yeah.
and that's part of the experience, because you can hear the dialogue between, Branford and you and Eric and Joey. And I think that's just fascinating because it's allowing you the opportunity to sort of share and acknowledge those experiences collectively together,
Sure.
as opposed to you being completely isolated at different parts of the stage. And although you're on stage, you don't have that
Sure.
same connection. So I love that whole connection. And another thing that I've been noticing a lot the last few times that I've saw the band is that Branford really seems to be going back really early on in music catalogs and bringing up
Mhm.
really old sort of standard American songs from sometimes like 100 years ago, and you'll bring stuff
Sure.
up, and it's fascinating because there's something musically about it, the song, that resonates with him, and so this is
Mhm.
his opportunity to kind of present it to you to get your own take on it. And it comes back to respecting the music
Mhm.
over aiming for just the top level musicianship. It comes back to here's the
Sure.
song, let's respect the song and then collectively see what we can do to enhance that. And you talked early on about your hatred of ballads at a young age.
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
I find that, anytime I've seen Branford, there's usually at least one ballad in the show. And I
Sure.
find the emotional depth of the music that you guys do in that context is
Mhm.
really, really powerful. And those are usually
Thank
some
you.
of my favorite moments of the show because it really comes down to the emotion of the song. And
Mhm.
everyone in the band does such a fantastic job of being so respectful in terms of allowing the space for that emotion to breathe.
Mm.
So that's actually become one of my highlights from your shows is those ballad moments.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny enough. Like I had a horror story happen to me when I was in a youth jazz group. I had come to all of the rehearsals and did my thing, just in terms of, being a participant. And there was an older drummer there that ended up playing the whole concert. And I was left to play blue and green, and I was livid.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm like, man, I didn't come here for this. Like you,
Yeah.
you have me playing one song,
Yeah.
and I was young and I wanted to play the fast tunes,
Yeah.
right? Like any young person would. But funny enough, when I actually went to study blue and green a little bit deeper, there was a version of it that was made by the trumpet player Russell Gunn that I was exposed to. It actually became a very important piece of the puzzle for me. Then I fell in love with ballads. Then I started listening to the Johnny Hartman, John Coltrane record. I started checking out there's a really beautiful tune called "They Say It's Wonderful," and you know you never think that I don't remember how old I was when this came out, but I was definitely still in my teens. You never think that a teenager would find out about a jazz standard in a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so like there was an opening scene where this woman was singing "They Say It's Wonderful," and or "It's Wonderful." I believe that's the name of that's the title. I forget exactly, but I then go to kind of research and see, who actually sang the tune. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe, let me look this up actually. It's in my playlist or in my oh yeah. So it was the version that Doris Day sang.
Hmm.
And growing up watching old movies with my family and, watching some of the old variety shows like the Lawrence Welk show and, American Bandstand and such, these names were actually kind of familiar to me. So yeah, I used to listen to They Say It's Wonderful every day for years. Like, I mean, then there's a Pat Metheny tune. I believe it's on his First Circle record. I mean, there's just all of these tunes that kind of came to me, in my research and nerddom, if you will. And I fell in love with ballads. And so joining Branford's band was interesting because I had never really, I didn't know how to play a rubato ballad when I got there,
Hmm.
and so him providing the opportunity for that exploration became really interesting because, our last record that we did, the album Belonging, so it's a whole lot of those ballads on the record, I mean, there's another ballad that Branford and Joey recorded on the dual record called "The Bard of Lachrymose," And, it's a long song. It's like 16 minutes. And it was just, you know, the level of mental focus that it takes
Mm-hmm.
to help propel and create forward motion in those songs while also still capturing the emotion, while also allowing whomever is soloing to be the leader of the motion, because the way that it works is that whoever's playing the melody, which is either your solo or the actual written melody, they are dictating the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm learning how to follow this, there's a language to playing that too. There's a lineage of playing rubato ballads or rubato ballads existing. Then there's also classical music. And fortunately enough for me, I grew up studying with the principal timpanist of the Philly Orchestra, Don Liuzzi, and I played timpani. That was kind of my main discipline, while also playing mallets and snare drum and all of the above. And I was playing in the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra at the time as well, and all city orchestra. So like everything leading up to playing with Branford kind of prepared me with a decent foundation to sort of understand how this time should float and also have consistent motion, right? After playing, a bunch of Brahms, a bunch of Shostakovich, a bunch of Rimsky-Korsakov, and even some of the modern stuff that we would play, it sort of kind of set a precedent for me as to what would be expected of me in terms of looking at the big picture of the pieces that we're playing with Branford, while also being able to hone in and zero in on the details. And so, now playing these ballads and also playing these older tunes too. I mean, that's my stuff.
Yeah.
I love 30s tunes. I love 20s tunes, and you know, like there's a playlist that Branford and I both listen to quite frequently. I believe it's like the King Oliver playlist on one of the streaming platforms. But I found this song called "In a Little Secondhand Store." It's like I would have never found this song
Mhm.
had it not been for the period specifically during the pandemic and prior, that all of us were really kind of doubling down on studying 20s music. We ended up doing the soundtrack for a Netflix film called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, where I mean, I shared the drum chair with Jason Marcel. Wait, I think on that one I shared the drum chair with Herlin Riley and Shannon Powell. And so, you know, it's like these guys live and breathe this stuff. And the one benefit that I had is that my family's from New Orleans. So like I'm the only one that was born in the Northeast. But you know, in a sense it's in my blood, and I got a chance to live there for a period of time when I was casted for another film about Buddy Bolden called Bolden. And like you get to see that stuff being played. You get to see that stuff being played in real time. You go to Preservation Hall, they're playing trad.
Yeah.
You go to you walk down the street, there's a brass band playing like a traditional song, in true brass band form, and the sound and the spirit and the lineage that is being carried on. So, I think fortunately enough for me, I had enough exposure in real life to the very things that I'm playing, even though it's a modern iteration of it.
Mm-hmm.
While I'm studying the past, there is the existence of these things in the present that will help me shape what I'm going to do in the future. So, yeah, like we enjoy playing these ballads and the older tunes as well. Like, we do our best to make sure that we're being honest about it, because I mean, I see, I have some friends that are like very into like the jazz age, clothing and the parties that they throw and so forth. And I think that's fantastic. It's awesome. And there's some really incredible players in those scenes, and the thing for me is that I always wondered, am I going to be able to capture the essence of that drum sound and that vocabulary without, having to have a 28-inch bass drum?
Yes.
And that's, don't get me wrong. I don't mind playing 28-inch bass drums. It's fun. I used one on a Kurt Rosenwinkel record. I used like 5 kits on that record. It was great. But my thought process is like, how do we get to the thing, that intangible piece that makes those songs so fantastic, and I think that's kind of the goal every night. Like, how does the song still continue to transcend time? And, from a place of responsibility, how do we help make that happen?
Now, to switch things a little bit here, you also grew up very heavily in a gospel church environment. And I've read that prayer, spiritual reflection, and focus practice are centers of your life's progress. So, how has growing up with faith and spirituality helped you to define your musical and personal paths?
Sure. Well, one, there's a there are a few scriptures that have helped sort of become a guiding light for me. When my father passed away, um, that was, any person losing a father, it's a tough experience. But I was very close with my dad. That was my guy. And a young man losing his father, there's a sort of unfortunate and also inevitable rite of passage that comes with that, to a degree, I believe. So, I was just kind of in my parents' room, and like my dad's hats were kind of in the closet. And so I grabbed one of his Apple Jacks like Donny Hathaway used to wear. And I kind of just had it with me, and I was praying, and I'm like, God, to be fair, I don't really know what's next. I don't know what will have me to do. Like, I miss my guy. And, something that I believe resonated in my spirit was the scripture, they will know you by the fruit that you bear. And the reality is that, that means that I have to operate in this life with a level of integrity. I have to operate in this life with a level of integrity, respect, honesty, and, with whatever I'm given, while everyone would like to say, oh man, you worked for it. Yeah, I did. Sure. I mean, that's another scripture. Faith without works is dead. Yeah, like, the script, like the scripture talks about faith without works being, fruitless. And so while I have faith, fortunately enough, God has allowed me to be a vessel to do the things that I'm doing, so I think, I mean, as the Bible says, my steps are ordered.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it is a prayer that I sometimes don't want to pray, because that with ordered steps comes high responsibility. With like with the gifting and the skill sets and the responsibilities that you're given, like, other people's lives are involved in that. Like, I mean, the fact that I've been in education now for almost 10 years, um, formally speaking, like, I'm responsible for the next generation that's coming through us, coming through our programs, and their parents are trusting us with their children's development, and that's not something that I take lightly. So I do my best to allow, one, the faith that I have to, you know help me stay connected to God in my prayer life, so that I'm aware of my next steps,
Mm-hmm.
the expansion of things that I've been working on. And, you know, perhaps, there's elevation in terms of the kind of roles that I'm taking on, or, there's a certain level of community service or a certain amount of community service that I need to do, in order to sort of help further along certain initiatives and such. I just do my best to stay connected to God, so that I understand what is required of me in the endeavors that I'm a part of. Another thing, I pray before I play every single time. There's a great drummer in Philadelphia named Jersey Mason. He's remarkable at everything. He's played with a bunch of artists like Mary J. Blige and Jay-Z and Jill Scott and all these people. But he's also like an incredible stage manager and drum tech and so forth. So yeah, he would always have this thing where he posted it every Sunday before he plays at church. He says, pray before you play. And like, I remember last night we actually played the entire A Love Supreme suite with Joey Calderazzo, bassist Michael Bowie, and the leader of the band was the saxophonist Paul Carr. And I prayed beforehand, and I just asked God to allow, the spirit of whatever, he had instilled in Train and also the spirit of whatever, the room needs tonight. I pray that is what flows through us, and I just, I prayed for a level of openness and a level of awareness of doing this. Cause I played A Love Supreme with Joey a bunch, but I'd never played it with Paul or Michael. And, being consummate musicians is one thing, but, that is a very specific space.
Yes, for sure.
To play in, it is like, especially those first three movements. It is pandemonium the whole time, but with responsibility. It's like the way that McCoy plays on Resolution to set up John Coltrane's solo, that's a responsibility. You can't just haphazardly play whatever you want and think that it will have the desired effect, right? And then on my end, I have to maintain and develop over time a high level of intensity the entire time,
yes.
Right? And fortunately enough, that's the way we play with Branford on a regular basis, and it doesn't make it easier. So I always pray for strength and clarity before we do any of our shows. But last night, since it was recent, that's what comes to mind. I do my best to make sure that while people may be coming to see us, I want, if it is God's will, I want someone to, desire a deeper relationship with him through the art and music that we're creating. It's not my job to convert. It's my job to bear fruit. And if I'm bearing fruit, for someone to ask me, why are you smiling? I'm like, well, besides the fact that the weather is warmer, because we thank God for that, because these snowstorms, goodness gracious, y'all are used to it, but man, oh man, Philadelphia got hit bad. And so, I often tell my friends, I'm like, while I appreciate happiness, my pastor would always say that he desires to have unadulterated Christian joy in his spirit and in his heart, and I pray that for myself and my family and those around me, and for people to just be able to have that kind of joy in spite of the circumstance,
That was part 1 of my interview with Justin Faulkner. Stay tuned to the next episode for part 2 of our discussion. In the meantime, thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Drummer's Pathway podcast. Please share and subscribe, get the word out, and let's keep the discussion going. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.